Hello and welcome. I'm Jennifer Shlomovich, and this is The Confident Vegan. On this channel, you'll find insightful interviews with inspiring vegans, practical tips for plant-based living, and empowering conversations about what it really means to live in alignment with your values. I am also the co-host of That Vegan Morning Show with Kimberly Winters of the Did You Bring the Hummus podcast. You can start your day the vegan way and watch us live every Monday morning at 7 a.m. Eastern on YouTube at That Vegan Morning Show. Today, my special guest is Amy Brink-Peterson. Amy is a plant-based health coach who supports changemakers who feel depleted, stretched too thin, or disconnected from their own well-being to rebuild their health, resilience, and vitality so they can sustainably lead and thrive in their advocacy and lives. Rooted in whole foods, plant-based living, and a transformative woman-centered coaching approach, Amy's coaching goes beyond surface level habit change to guide clients through deep identity transformation, empowering them to step into their full potential as leaders and visionaries. Drawing from her own experience with burnout and the profound, challenging, and beautiful transformation of becoming a mother, Amy is deeply passionate about helping others care for their health as the foundation for long-term impact. She believes veganism is a practice of loving kindness that extends not only to non-human animals, but also to ourselves. Amy is trained and certified by Food Revolution Network and continues to expand her expertise through advanced training with the Institute for Women-Centered Coaching and collaboration with vegan psychologist Clare Mann. Based in the Netherlands, she offers coaching in both English and Dutch to clients around the world. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. We have a lot in common
Yes, we do.
with
Yeah.
with our missions, and I'm so happy that Claire connected us. I had her on recently as well. We had an amazing conversation, and yeah, I'm really excited to talk with you today. And so the first question I ask my guests is, what is your vegan story?
Yeah. Well, looking back, I became vegan about 5 years ago, just before Easter, 5 years ago. But if I look back, honestly, the transformation started much earlier. In many ways, I think we're all kind of born vegan and then we learn other things. We kind of are conditioned to forget that loving kindness, and to consume animals and treat them differently and all of that. So I think I was always vegan. I just had forgotten it for many years. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I rediscovered it. And it was really the process of becoming a mother that was really the transformation I needed to take this step to become vegan. My daughter at the time was about 6 months old. I had gone through breastfeeding, which was sometimes wonderful, sometimes horrible. So, and if
I
you're
can relate to that.
it's a beautiful thing, but it's also an awful thing sometimes. It can be quite painful. So it's really taxing on your
Mhm.
body. And at the same time, what some of the most beautiful intimate moments with my daughter were during breastfeeding. And so I was in this immense transformation. I was a new mom, had this, little being I was taking care of, and there were so many changes happening in my life at that moment. And COVID, was around. So it was a very strange time. And then I listened to a podcast from a Dutch anthropologist here in the Netherlands. Her name is Roanna van Voorst. She wrote a book about it's in Dutch it's called Ooit aten we dieren. In English, I believe it's called Once Upon a Time We Ate Animals. And it was an interview about her book. And I just thought, well, if I listen to this, I might be opening some kind of Pandora's box here. Uh, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to listen to it and just hear what she has to say. So I turned on the podcast, and an hour later, it was the last thing I needed to hear, her words and the way she described things. And it just opened up a door for me. It was kind of like stepping out of the matrix in a way.
Mm,
And I just was able to really connect with this deeper empathy, for other beings that I had forgotten, or had unlearned for many years. And I came out of the podcast and I went downstairs and I told my husband, I'm going to be vegan. And he was quite surprised. But it was just, I think, especially the part about, because me being a new mom, when Roanna, when she was describing her own moment of transformation of becoming vegan, she was talking about dairy. And when she described that, and when it hit me, what happens with dairy, what happens to make that possible, that there's forced impregnation, uh, then a baby is born, you have pregnancy, and then a baby is born, baby is taken away from its mother, or from his or her mother, I should say, actually. I'm going to correct myself there with the pronoun. Um, and then we take the milk. And my mind, having my own child, my worst nightmare is that somebody would take my child away or harm her in any way.
Yeah.
And that just really hit home, that I thought, wow, this is what we're doing. We are, we are creating these pregnancies and these births, and then we're tearing them apart from each other. And they both end up in the slaughterhouse. And I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. And I wanted to do something else. So I decided I'm just not going to participate in this. So that was really the thing that really got to me. I was able to, yeah, empathize with another being, um, in a way that I hadn't for a very long time. Yeah.
That's a really beautiful story. And yeah, I think, I talk a lot on here about cognitive dissonance, right? People, and I used to be one of those people where I knew what the animal products were, but
Yeah.
you have it packaged, you don't think about it, right? You're raised to just look at it as food, as dairy, it's normal, it's what is acceptable in society. And and then something happens. And what you said about the matrix is exactly an analogy I use quite frequently
Yeah.
because that's what happens. You realize something. And for me, my story is a little bit different. And it started with dairy, but for different reasons.
Oh,
I was really frustrated with rosacea and eczema breakouts, and I was reading an article about how different foods can trigger skin conditions. And I decided to do a little experiment and take a break from dairy for 30 days. And I felt a lot better within like a week. I noticed my sinuses were better, my skin was starting to clear up, and I just felt like this overall sense of well-being. Like I didn't realize my normal operating system was this other feeling until I removed the dairy. And I started looking up these dairy-free recipes, and a lot of vegan recipes had come up. And I realized the vegan food looked much more exciting than the
yeah, right.
non-vegan food, like very colorful with all the different vegetables and just creative uses, especially with whole food plant-based. I came across forks over knives and found like healthy versions of comfort food. And with heart disease and diabetes in my family, my mom had died of a heart attack, and I wanted to start taking better care of my body before I start running into the same types of issues as my parents. And so
Yeah.
I started cooking a lot, and it started all with the food. And I then I ended up watching a documentary, and that's it was Vegucated. It was on like Netflix one day, and I tried to avoid documentaries because I don't like seeing horrific things done to animals, but I felt like I needed to see this because this one covered all the different aspects of veganism. And so I watched it, and that was like where that seed was planted of, oh, I want to do this, but I can't do that because my family wouldn't want to be vegan.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you bring that up. Yeah, yeah. It takes quite some courage, I think. And what you're describing, what I'm hearing you say is you felt this within you, you felt this drive. It started off with a health motivation, which is completely fine. I know many people who start off that way.
Yeah.
And that's a perfectly legitimate reason to go in that direction, caring for loving kindness towards yourself, right? And to take care of
Yeah.
yourself.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think sometimes there can be shaming in the vegan community for people who are health focused. I mean, I think however you can reduce as much animal suffering as possible, whatever gets you in the door, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I went to an animal rights conference last year in Luxembourg, and there was a speaker there who spoke about, he used an analogy called, I think he called it the vegan mansion, which I thought
Oh,
was,
really?
yeah. And he said there are many doors. So, and one of the doors is a health motivation. And then once you get in the door, there are many rooms to explore. And that's what we often see happen. So I've seen it happen many times that people start off for a different reason. You know, they're not thinking necessarily of animals or things like that. They might be just thinking like, wow, I have a heart condition, or I'm sick, or I have skin issues. And they're really just trying to solve that immediate problem.
Yeah.
It's completely understandable. And as a health coach, I can completely understand that. That's a great reason to start looking in that direction. And then often what happens is once you start to explore, like you just said, like when you start to explore that, there's something about then you're kind of your defenses kind of go down a bit, you know, because you're
Yeah.
already open to the idea of eating plant-based. And so then when you receive other information about maybe animal suffering, for example, the normal defenses that may have come up before aren't as strong or not there anymore. So there's also a kind of openness that can happen. So I think it's a very powerful door to enter. And I mean, when I think of my own work as a health coach, it's really about aligning your well-being with, you know, being vegan in whatever way you've become vegan. So yeah, so it's not that health is unimportant. I think a lot of advocates tend to forget our own wellness. They're really high risk
Yeah.
of burnout. And I also think a lot of the infighting that you might see among certain, you know, groups or whatever, I think a lot of that, from what I can tell so far, you know, if your own foundation is not well, if you're operating from a place of pain,
Yeah.
or whatever pain that might be, then yeah, infighting and conflict is much more likely to happen, and in a way that stagnates progress and doesn't help animals in the end. So it's really about that sustainable um, way of moving forward together. And it begins with your own self-care. It begins with turning veganism towards yourself first, really. Yeah.
I love that because, there's that, and I also love the vegan mansion analogy. I feel like that's really
Yeah.
accurate.
Yeah. I love
But
that when
yeah,
they explain
like they
it.
say when you're on an airplane, right? If there's an emergency and the oxygen masks drop down, right? You're supposed to put the oxygen on yourself first before you can assist with anyone who's next to you. And if we want to be there for our families and friends and loved ones, and if we want to be there to promote veganism and do, any type of advocacy work or whatever it is that you want to do, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to have that energy to do these things. And that's when burnout can happen.
Yeah.
And which is something you have a lot of experience with yourself and with also helping others. And yeah, can you share a little bit about that journey and what inspired you to do the work that you are doing now?
Sure. Yeah. Yes, I definitely have my own burnout experience. A few years ago, I didn't see it coming. It was fun. That's the funny thing about burnout issue. At least for me, I didn't notice the signs that were there. Um, I think others around me were starting to notice. We're asking questions, "Are you
That's
okay?" I'm
usually
like,
the case, right?
"Ah."
Everyone else notices before
Yeah,
you
you're
do.
like, "Right." I got a really friendly colleague who came up to me and was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm fine." And at the time, I was working in my old job at a company that was a training company. But I had a new job. I was a new mom. I had become vegan recently. COVID had happened. There were so many changes happening. And major changes like that can be one of the factors that contributes to burnout. So we have major life changes, and I had several at once. Um, and it came to a point where I didn't see it coming, but right before I guess you'd say crashed, I noticed that my emotions became really amplified. So I became really, really angry, like just furious about things where, it was very out of proportion. I became I cried multiple times a day. I just noticed I was not responding in a way that was in proportion to whatever the situation was.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a deadline coming up at work, and it was just normally I was, okay with these kind of things. But it just was kind of the last drop. And it just really, and right before I crashed, I noticed that I couldn't think straight anymore. It was kind of felt like syrup in my head. And
Mm.
afterwards, I learned that tends to be one of the last things that can happen with a burnout is your cognitive ability drops. Your body's literally just saying like, we need to stop. Um, I just kind of hit a wall. So I finally call in sick. I thankfully had a manager at the time who was very understanding and just told me like, you need to call in sick and see what's going on. She was very, very helpful. And that's when I finally stopped my paid work and just, was able to rest a bit. That's when I started to feel how incredibly exhausted I was. And I remember having days where I couldn't do more than just lay on the couch. I was just so
Mm.
tired. Um, and I had, I had muscle aches. It was just, my body was so tight. I had been in this survival mode for so long. I'm not realizing it. And then when you're in that mode, you don't feel as well. So that's kind of the irony is it's great that, when you run from the figurative lion, let's say that you don't feel as much because the point is to run and to survive.
Yeah.
We don't want to think about the lion. We just want to run. But
Yep.
in that state a lot, and for an elongated period of time, it takes a huge toll on your body. And at a certain point, your body says no. So I just crashed, and it took me I think about 3 years to really fully recover. I thought I'd be
Mm.
fine within a couple of months or so, but it took much longer. And at my lowest point, I remember even having very dark thoughts of like, yeah, maybe it'd be better if I wasn't even here. I mean, it
Mm.
really led to these depressive moments. But thankfully, I had a lot of support. And once I started to regain a little bit of energy, I was able to put that energy that I had into healing. And one of the key people who helped me out, I had a lot of people who helped me out, health professionals, but one of the key people who really helped me out was a fabulous coach. And she was really great about helping me to look inward and not just manage symptoms or, just rest and go back to the same thing, but really looking at what are those patterns that are happening inside? How am I responding? Because we often think of burnout as like it's a work thing or you're just too busy or it's really about the environment you're in. And absolutely certain environments can create a greater challenge.
Mm-hmm.
In essence, from my experience, from what I can tell, and from everything I've read and learned since then, it's really about how we respond to those situations. So it's not the environment, but how we respond to it, how we operate in that. And there were a lot of unconscious ways that I was operating that were um, leading me in this direction, taking on responsibility that wasn't my own. Um, and I'm really glad that I was able to have somebody with me to help me look at that deeper level. Because that was needed in order to be able to change the way I lived. Yeah, because there's so much you can't change, right? You can't change your colleague, you can't change your boss unless you switch jobs, or you can't change war happening in the world. You can't, if I had a magic wand, I would make factory farming disappear, but I can't change that either on my own, right?
Yeah.
There's so much going on, and then when you think about it in a context of vegans or vegan advocates, there's so much challenge, um, and we're faced with an incredible system of violence and oppression. So how do you respond to that, right? In a way that you don't go under, but you can create change in a way that everyone can grow. So um, I'm actually looking back, I'm really glad I had the burnout. It was terrible at the time, it was awful, but it was something that I needed to go through um, in order to become the person I am now. Is it brought me to a level where I needed to look at certain things happening on the inside, some of those unconscious things happening. And that's now in my work as a coach that led me to this work of like, how can I support others then? Um, to take care of yourself, to align your health and your purpose and your impact. It's not just about tips and tricks and which diet and this and that. Often it's at a much deeper level of who we think we are. To what extent do we believe we're safe? Uh,
Hmm.
um, are we seeking approval or acceptance? As our driving factor, or are we? So all of these things, and the more I do this work, and the more I'm going in depth with others now, which is what an honor that I get to do that. Um, well, I'm seeing how important it is to look at those deeper layers because they impact so much of how we operate in the world. And when we can look at those with love and acceptance and we can bring them into light, then we can choose something different. We can change ourselves and we can create a vegan world. I think a vegan world is possible, but it's not possible within the old paradigms that we have been operating up until now. So, um, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable about your personal story. I think, as women, a lot of women have these types of scary thoughts, especially being so overwhelmed, and your body goes through changes for a long time when you have a child, right?
Yeah.
There's the hormonal changes during pregnancy, then there's the hormonal changes post-pregnancy. Then there's, if you're breastfeeding, there's also additional hormonal stuff, right? Like there's all these things happening and it's such a being a mom is like a beautiful, wonderful experience, and it's probably also the most terrifying experience because,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
you feel so much responsibility for this little being, and and also I think women lose their identity sometimes, right? That who you were before you become a mom, and then now you're a mom, but you can feel disconnected from yourself. You lose sight of who you are and now everything is different and all of those things take time to process, and it's great that you were able to take your experiences and process them and turn them into a way to help other women who are going through these same types of struggles, and then being vegan on top of that can be really isolating, and where you do become more sensitive as you become more aware of all of the things, right? Like vegans walking through a grocery store, when you're walking through the meat section, it
Yeah.
feels like walking through a graveyard, right? You're just seeing all these parts.
Yeah.
And at one point, I remember just seeing it as food. And it can be challenging when you live in a household where you're the only vegan.
Yeah.
And my family has been, we're both respectful of everyone's choices, right? I'm not pushing my stuff onto them. They're not pushing things onto me. Sometimes we joke around and we have our banter and we'll tease each other about our choices, um but there's respect there. But not everyone, where I run into the challenges is other family or other social settings where sometimes there's people that are less accepting or just more judgmental, or sometimes you just have people who want to be combative about your veganism and want to challenge you and they want to show you, right, that that you're wrong
Yeah.
somehow,
Yeah.
right? And that can feel it can and it, again, even if people are being supportive and respectful of your vegan choices, it still can still feel very isolating. And so you work with a lot of change makers. So what are some of the typical challenges that have come up with the clients you have worked with?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, well, isolation that you're mentioning, that is absolutely a challenge that can come up. Especially, and also things like energy issues. So, as what I noticed is that when people, so far, what I've seen with people I've worked with, and when you go to do something that's not the status quo,
Hmm.
even if it's just changing, and I want to really expand the definition of change maker. I mean, that could be, someone who considers themselves an activist. It could be an entrepreneur. It could be an educator. It could also be someone who just in his or her own family is trying to create a shift.
Yeah.
Um, so I see that as, it's a person who is really driven to make a better world, to be part of that, creating that better world and really in this direction, right, of more loving kindness towards all beings. So so some of the challenges that come up, yeah, absolutely, like social, what's the right word? I guess social challenges, I'll say, so that what you're describing is, yeah, they might not be understood by everyone. So it could be because they're vegan. It could also be because maybe they're creating or doing something that's not, that's new, that's brand new, and the others around them don't understand what it is they're creating. Um, so that's what's so neat about having a coach is that in the relationship within coaching, you have another person who sees you for your potential and for the person you are becoming, the change maker that you are and that you are becoming. And that is so important because we don't become ourselves by ourselves. We become ourselves in relationship. And some of our existing relationships can sometimes present, it can make it harder in that sense. They're an amazing source of support, but they can also be, if your family doesn't yet understand what you're up to,
Yeah.
they might still see you as the way you were 10 years ago. They might have a very different way of seeing who you are, and that's not necessarily, I don't want to say that's wrong, but it can, that's not a relationship that's necessarily going to encourage your growth to do something new and incredible and create something that is uniquely you. So I think with a coaching relationship, that's where you create a relationship with another person who can see you for your potential now and can see beyond what you can see. That's so neat when, because I think a lot of people that come, that's another thing I noticed too, is when people come for coaching, they may not see their own potential yet, right?
Yeah.
But there's something there. Um, it's kind of like I kind of I don't equate it to, like, it's like I have Luke Skywalker sitting in front of me and he doesn't know it yet.
Right.
I'm like, you're Luke Skywalker, right?
Don't you know what you're going to do later?
Right. So it's like I get to sit down with Luke Skywalker every time. So it's and to see this person for this incredible change maker that they are becoming. And it's not something distant in the future, it's something that's happening already. Um, and it's, yeah, but what they, yeah, so when you go to create something new like that, whether it's a business or, people are shifting, maybe they're doing something in their existing work or within their community or their family, they hit their own barriers, internal barriers of what they believe they can and can't do.
Hmm.
And they hit external resistance, right? Of what the external barriers, whatever those might be. So it can be quite taxing on their energy. And I'm noticing energy is especially, that's a really big one. It doesn't necessarily have to be burnout per se, but dealing with energy and how do you take care of yourself in this way, in a way that's sustainable and not that it's a quick thing and then you burn out. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what you were sharing there. And with my own experiences with coaching as well, the biggest changes I went through in my life, I needed the support of other people to be able to make those big changes.
Yeah.
And our immediate, our loved ones, families, friends that we acquired through other versions of ourselves, they
Yeah.
may not be able to support us to who we're becoming.
That can
And
be. Yeah.
when you can put yourself with community or a coach or therapy or all of the above, uh,
Yeah.
sometimes you need all of the above. Um, it helps you be able to take those larger leaps and feel safe and okay and and be comfortable with navigating the uncomfortable, right? It's that weird in between space of I can't stay where I've been.
Yeah.
Want to be in this other place, but I am not there yet. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so the coach
Exactly.
helps you build that bridge to connect you from those places of where you're coming from and where you're going. And when you have a sturdier bridge to walk on, you feel
Yeah.
safer to get there. And all of it is a process. And when you have that community and have someone there cheering you on, and it can really help. And I think, loved ones that, don't feel supportive, I think they're supporting you the best that they can because,
Yeah. I think so.
right, they're not seeing things from that place. They don't want to see you get hurt. They don't want to see you do something risky. So they're coming from that place, or you're being different, right? For example, with veganism, if you're looking at it from there, right? There's myths about, a lot of about nutrition, for example.
Yes.
And it can be hard for people to be supportive, especially like parents, because they have those old nutrition narratives that they're thinking about. So they're operating from that space. And so what's helped me navigate those challenges is like understanding why people think the way that they do,
Yeah.
setting any necessary boundaries and communicate them as tactfully as possible, which can be hard, but it is, then that's a lot of the work that I do. Um, and then, yeah, and then, just finding that community to help you continue to go where you're going, because sometimes people can feel selfish, especially women. Again, we can feel selfish for wanting to pursue something if everyone else around us is not on board with it. And but if you're not living in alignment with yourself, that's it can be very debilitating, right? And that impacts our energy, right?
Yes.
We're not feeling like we can thrive because we're operating in an area that's not in alignment.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I agree. And I'm really glad that you bring up that certain things, especially for women. I think that's something that's one of the reasons I wanted to deepen my skills with the Institute for Women-Centered Coaching is, um, well, first of all, most of the people worldwide who engage in coaching are women. So most coaches are women. Um, but so that aside. So maybe the majority should be paid attention to. But what's neat about looking at the unique needs of women, and what I'm learning through this training that I'm in, one of the things I'm learning is that I'm starting to connect the dots between we as women, we have, of course, a history behind us where we, in general, are not the ones in power. Right?
Yeah.
So we have inherited this world in which historically women are dependent on those in power, and it's usually men, right? So or a man of some. So it's and this can also extend to other groups that have been marginalized, as well. So that there's if you're in a situation where you have lesser power historically, right? There's certain
Hmm.
things that play into how we operate today that we've inherited as a way of surviving. And so if you're not the one in power, if you're the one who's dependent on the other one, how do you survive? One of the ways you can survive is, for example, to make sure that the other one is happy, right? To know what's going to be very other focused,
Hmm.
people pleasing, fawning, all of that. So there's those are all mechanisms that are trying to help us survive. And in many cases, it has helped us amazingly to survive and to move forward. And at the same time, those mechanisms can't create the vegan world that we yearn for, because what that is, it's something beyond what exists now. So those mechanisms, they're not necessarily, they're not saying like bad or good. It's just that they bring us to a certain point and can serve us in certain ways, but they cannot bring us to this vegan world that we yearn for. Those deeper yearnings of things we want to create that don't exist yet, they can't do that. They can't create those things. And that's what I'm starting to notice. Connect the dots between this bigger context of, who historically has been in power and who has not been in power. What does that mean for how we operate now? Uh,
Hmm.
there are certain patterns that seem to be common, that I'm learning about as I'm in this certification now among women. Patterns of invisibility, of not feeling like you're enough, not feeling safe. And what does that mean? If you're carrying this pattern around, these stories around in some unconscious way, what does that mean for your advocacy? So if
Mm.
the assumption, for example, and I've had this one, entering into a space where I'm meeting new people, assuming I will be rejected, right? Assuming I'm not safe being vegan. What is that? That I have this assumption, that's how I enter the space. And that assumption limits my power. So
Yeah.
So it's looking at those things, and it's the intersection of being vegan, so which is also a minority, right? But and all these other parts of ourselves, and maybe as women comes together, and it creates this dynamic where we are limited then in our power to create and to connect to others. So it's so important. I'm starting to notice how important it is to recognize those mechanisms,
Hmm.
and they don't need to disappear, but just to recognize like, oh, they're there and they're operating, and I can choose
Yeah.
something different. And you're talking about that space in between. I love how you named that kind of awkward space when you've recognized the old and you're moving to something new. Yeah, that awkward growth of
I've heard some people refer to it as the messy middle,
the
which
messy middle. Yeah, yeah, it is messy, and just like,
yeah.
oh, so if you're going to break free of these patterns that have held you back, or have limited you in some way, like let's say, how do you create your own safety,
Hmm.
communicating with others, for example. So if you have this sense of, you have this belief, I'm not safe, for example, that's one that I've carried with me for quite a while, this assumption. And then, okay, I recognize it there. And what can I then move toward? What's something that can, what's the deeper truth actually about that? And then
Yeah.
how do I manifest that? And how does that show up in my life? So it's, yeah, I'm noticing that I mean, when I think about it, oppression is oppression, right? It's just in different forms and towards different groups. And to me, oppression towards non-human animals is another facet of oppression.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
It's treating the animals as less than,
yeah,
right?
there's,
It's treating another group that of less than and justifying whatever the abuse is
yeah,
because you're determining that these beings are less than.
yeah, they're somehow less than us, they're less important, and simply because they're another species.
Right.
Um,
Or and then there's the other, well, this is how it's always been, right? That's that
yeah,
whole narratives that are still gripping onto society with everything, right?
yeah, yeah. There are a lot of things we've done for a very long time that I would say are probably not a good idea. We did
Exactly.
slavery,
That's a whole other
something we
show.
did historically, but probably wasn't a good idea.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot of those.
a lot of those things, like, yeah, we've done this for thousands of years. Well, yeah, just because we've done it for a long time doesn't make it a good idea, indeed. So, yeah, so it's just I'm starting to notice the connections here, and I'm thinking, wow. And then I'm getting really curious about. I see so much potential, even if just a handful of vegan advocates, or
Hmm.
change makers, right? If just a handful of them are able to shift a little more into their, or to recognize these patterns that they might be carrying around, these limitations, and then are able to shift their behavior in some way to a new reality, what could they do?
Yeah.
That's when I start to get excited, and especially around with women. I think there are so many, yeah, incredible women, change makers in this realm, um, known and unknown.
Yeah.
Wow, what could they do?
Yeah. I mean, I could look at myself as an example, like the biggest things that I was able to change and shift in my own life happened because of changing my beliefs about myself
Yeah.
and how I operate in the world. What am I going to accept and no longer accept as a recovering people pleaser? As much as I don't people please now, there's still elements where I still grapple with residual beliefs around that. But because I have that awareness, I'm able to challenge it. And then if it's hard for me to break through that barrier of that belief, that's where coaching is helpful, or therapy, or a podcast, or books. Like there's so many different tools and resources that have helped me move forward. And there's never just like one destination we're getting to. Like there's that mindset of I just need to get here and then everything will be fine. There's always going to be multiple things
Yeah.
happening simultaneously, especially when you're a parent. I feel like then that opens like a whole
Yeah.
other wave of other things that you're navigating.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, this has been really great, Amy. Really enjoying talking. I feel like we could talk forever
Yeah, I
on
know.
this. Um, Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, what are some tips that you have for vegans who are experiencing isolation and loneliness? What are some things that they can do that can help them navigate those really intense feelings and emotions?
Yeah. Well, I just first of all want to mention to anybody who might be feeling this, you are absolutely not the only one feeling this. I have definitely myself have grappled with those feelings. And just know that those feelings are also normal. I really want to normalize those feelings. Um, it's likely that they're a part of what, psychologist Clare Mann describes as part of dystopia,
Yeah,
this anguish of being vegan in a non-vegan world. And the isolation is sometimes one of the most painful parts of that. So, um, what I could say to somebody who's feeling with that is there's nothing wrong with you. It's normal, and you can absolutely get through this. And what's really helpful is connecting with others, who see you, right? So to have uh, what I remember the first time that I saw more than two vegans together at the same time, and I was just thrilled. I just
yeah,
couldn't believe it. How big that was. So just really to seek out a place where you don't have to explain yourself, or
yeah,
yeah, you can just relax. I think that's important. To have a place, whatever that is for you, even if it's just one other person, and it can be online, it can be, in your physical space, whatever it is. Um, and to also, yeah, seek out, and depending on to what extent you're struggling with this, you seek out support, because this is a
yeah,
major, if somebody's dealing with this, I mean, you're going through an amazing transformation as a vegan, and parts of it can be really, really hard.
yeah,
Seek out support, whatever support that might be, if that's a coach or a therapist, something like that. And there are some incredible books out there. I think that's really, really, really important. And support comes in many forms. Um, and also, I think it's really important. This goes back more to what I focus on, is just really resourcing yourself with your own self-care. So really, it comes down to really simple things like, are you drinking enough water? Those kinds of.
yeah,
Sometimes when I feel tired and frustrated, I just need a cup of tea. Like that. And that's great. And looking at food. We and you know for sure, Jennifer, too, that whole foods, plant-based eating is incredibly supportive of your body.
yeah,
And I do see a lot of vegans, they are eating plant-based, but not necessarily whole foods. So they might be eating a lot
yeah,
of processed foods, high in salts or high in sugars, processed oils, things like that. And there's more and more research that shows, there's a link between, for example, highly processed foods and depression. So
yeah,
these kinds of things definitely can impact your mood. Um, so just shifting a little bit more towards, plants that you recognize as a plant. Yeah. Little shifts like switching from a white grain to a whole grain can make a huge difference, nutritionally. So pick the whole grain rice instead of the white rice next time. Just these little shifts can make a big difference. But those are all things. And I also think it's really important. One thing you were asking before also about challenges that I'm noticing. One thing I do notice among the people that I've been coaching so far is that one of the areas of their wellness that seems to be in a lot of lack is relaxation and free time.
Mm,
So important for our well-being.
I can
Uh,
relate to this.
yeah, and especially if you're a parent, right? If you're doing some kind of change-making work or advocacy work, there can be this tendency to not, you know, to see that time as like not useful or wasteful or luxury or something like that, but it's really not.
Yeah.
It's so important that your nervous system has the chance to calm down, right? That we're not just constantly doing, but we can, and it can be really simple. Taking a walk in the woods, you know, um, I don't know, listening to some music, that you feel good with, whatever it is. I think those are really, really important. And or an activity that you love to do. If there's a sport you love, or you like to be in the garden, or some kind of silly thing, having fun and relaxing is so important for our well-being. Um, so just adding a little bit more of that, I think, can be really, really helpful. Gives your body the time and the chance it needs to recover. Um, Yeah, so that's one I think that's often overlooked in our wellness is
I think those are all really wonderful tips. And it's what you brought up, focusing again on the self-care. And yeah, that's one of the things I grapple with is like the guilt of, oh, I should be using this time for something else. And I've gotten better at finding little pockets of time. I think a lot of us have this belief that, oh, I can't relax because that takes too much time. I'll just save it for the weekend when I can maybe find a couple hours to do something. You can, even if it's just 30 minutes in the day or an hour or again, 10 minutes, like sometimes just listening to something, uh, while I'm busy working. I have a day job and then I'm also doing this work, right? So sometimes I'll just put on a podcast or listen to music that feels really good while I'm doing these things. Like there's so many ways to infuse
yeah.
self-care practices in your day-to-day. Like self-care isn't just, going off to retreat somewhere or I mean
Yeah.
it can be, but
That can
there's
be great. Yeah,
and
but yeah.
yeah. But you don't need to have that kind of financial investment or time investment to
No.
find little ways. And those little changes, what you brought up before about whole food plant-based and like just switching something maybe from, like white rice to brown rice, like whole grains, right? Just
Yeah.
little changes, just, even if it's just as just incorporating eating more fruit, right? And then just building from there or changing one meal at a time for a week, just focus on changing your breakfast, right? And then you get used to that and then you switch on to lunch. There's so many different ways to incorporate change and when you do in little incremental shifts, that's where it's more sustainable. And yeah, whole food plant-based. I would say eat 80% whole food plant-based, and then if I want a treat, I'll have a vegan version of something like ice cream or whatever. Uh, but there, the eating whole food plant-based helps reduce inflammation,
Yeah.
which all and inflammation triggers all types of things, hormonal imbalances and just, what you were talking about before, depression, and it impacts our microbiome. I've had guests on here before talk about that. So what we eat really also has such a great impact on everything else that we do. And so if if you're going through a really stressful time in life, focusing on how you feel your body can be one of the best ways to take care of yourself and just doing those swaps to help help it, will help that internal shift of your overall well-being.
Yes, I completely agree. I think we often underestimate how powerful our food is.
Yeah.
It's so incredible. And I think it's and indeed a lot of these things are things we don't necessarily once you know it. I mean, I've gone through the training with Food Revolution Network, for example, and have, gone in more and you've had several guests on your show, of course, who've gone in depth about these kinds of things. Once you know it, it's kind of obvious.
Yeah.
But years ago, I had no idea that white rice, that there was a difference nutritionally between white rice and whole grain rice, or like that
Yeah.
was a difference. But it makes a huge difference.
Oh yeah.
It's
100%.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of I love the stoplight system from Dr. Michael Greger. I don't know if you're familiar with that. He has a kind of metaphor that I think it's
Yeah.
simple. It's this kind of green is, like things you should eat every day, like whole foods, plant-based, unprocessed whole plant foods. And you have yellow, which is like with caution, once in a
Yeah.
while. And you have the red foods, which are like stop and think before you put it in your mouth. And I love the way that he describes that because it provides this kind of spectrum. Because it's not like it's not so black and white with food.
Yeah.
And you can, like you said, you can absolutely have exceptions, unless you're suffering from a food addiction or something like that. You can absolutely make exceptions and your body can bounce back pretty well. It's pretty strong. So it's not about what you eat on a holiday or, at the birthday party. It's about what you do consistently on a regular basis. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's also I was and some things can be enablers for others. Like if there's a sauce that you love that's in the red category, but you pour it over a mountain of greens, and that's how you get your greens in, great, go for
Yeah.
it. Like you don't have to
Yeah.
be perfect, right? So if that's how you get your greens in, then wonderful, if that helps you. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and and a lot of times there's usually like a whole food plant-based version of like a dressing, for example. Like you can make a whole food plant-based version of like ranch dressing, for example,
Yeah.
right? It's about you can have the same taste and flavors, you can and still, but you're taking care of yourself. You can still have cookies. Like I make sometimes like cookies or muffins using oats and bananas and like all these things. And it
Yeah.
tastes like something you would get out, but it's just got better ingredients for you. It's much better for you. And so, yeah, find the healthy comfort food.
Yeah, exactly. And indeed about a way that's like you're saying, doing it in a way that it's not about punishing yourself, it's about taking care of yourself and enriching yourself. So it's right. So it's about providing your body with and your mind also with the nourishment. And
Yeah.
nourishment can be something fun. Like if there's a muffin that you love to make, sounds like a great recipe. Yeah, by all
Yeah.
means. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
I have a book, a little free downloadable book that has like has a banana muffins, pumpkin chocolate chip pumpkin loaf, and sheet pan pancakes. So I'll include the link in the notes below if anyone's interested in that. Um, before we wrap up, what are some resources you would like to recommend for people on their journey?
yeah, great. Well, I once in a while I do organize free workshops.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so we can provide the link below in the notes to this
Yeah.
session. So at the moment, the next one's not planned yet, but you can add yourself to the waiting list so that you
Okay.
can right away. So we can provide the link below for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other resources that have really helped me as well. Gosh, yeah, I really, well, where I did my training, Food Revolution Network, for anything food, more health related, I think is a wonderful resource. That's often where I go to find out things. Nutritionfacts.org. Also, again,
Love
free nutritional information, which I'm sure you're
That's a great
familiar with.
resource. Yeah, Dr. Greger.
Dr. Michael Greger, that's I love a great resource. I asked a dietitian friend of mine where she goes to find out information if she has a question, and she said nutritionfacts.org. So okay, I thought, well, that's good. That reaffirms that the resource for me. Yeah, and also more for the psychological aspect. I mean, the work of Clare Mann, for example, I find incredibly helpful
Yes.
about dystopia, I can highly recommend that. Other psychologists too, work of Melanie Joy, those types of people. That's been incredibly helpful for me. Melanie Joy also has a specific book about relationships. It's called
Oh,
Beyond Beliefs,
yes.
and I found incredibly. You were talking before about, in a household, especially in a partner relationship, um, that can be really challenging. And I have that as well. That's My husband is not yet vegan. I'm vegan, and that can be really, really challenging. And I
Yeah.
found that an incredible resource. Her work is really, really great around that. Yeah, so those are some of the things that have helped me out a lot.
Great. I'll include links to all of that in the notes below this video. Yeah, Amy, thank you so much.